She's like a goddamn poster child for high school.
Morning, sunshine. Remember, these are the best days of your life. So far.
Growing up, some of my favorite movies to watch included Mean Girls, Wild Child, House Bunny, the Bring It On franchise, Not Another Teen Movie, 13 Going on 30, and Mean Girls 2, which I honestly liked a lot more than the first Mean Girl. Don't hate me, my young brain just really preferred the second one to the first one. You can tell that I honestly watched a sufficient amount of teen films. These movies, they influenced my perception of teens and how I believed that my teenage years would be. I was wrong. Whereas I believed that my years would be filled with drama, parties, binge drinking, making new friends, and just living through life-altering experiences, it was in reality a complete snooze fest. I could not relate any less to the experiences televised. I watched these teens and I thought they were so freaking cool. Now when watching these characters, I am honestly in disbelief at how cringy a majority of these scenes are.
Stay down there and don't ever look at me again. Better yet, don't even breathe the same air.
Especially the characters, because they're just so weird. You have all these expectations of your teen years and what it would be like, and the disillusionment of this is honestly saddening. They shape the narrative of how I believe that my teenhood and my teen years would be and how I believe teens were and how they acted. I thought when going to high school I would have my own clique and I would be popular, when in reality it was the complete opposite. It's worth questioning whether or not these films were actually good or if it's simply my nostalgia that makes me adore these films all the more. So Hollywood has the tendency to display high school as being the best time of your lives, but the reality is that you have the rest of your life to have the best years of your life. So focusing too hardly on the mundanity of your teenage experiences can have a lasting impact on how you perceive yourself in the future.
You are, I bet you really whipped him up back when you were cheerleading captain.
Me? Oh, no. I was much more of a band chick, actually. Tuba. Lead tuba. Honor band.
As of lately, the rise of this whole main character attraction has influenced a lot of Gen Z teens to embody aspects of the main character, but this trope derives from the movies we all grew up watching, which clearly has had a lasting impact on the way that we perceive ourselves and the validity that we ascribe to our own experiences. Chapter 1: The Media and How Teenagers Are Represented.
You know, this whole teenager coming of age thing, I mean, it's a relatively new construct. They came up with it in the 50s, so it's okay.
The notion of the teenager that we see today did not always exist. You were a child, you got a job, and then you were an adult. The term teenager can be traced back to the early 1920s, however, it really stuck in the 1940s. In 1944, Life magazine published an article and introduced the teenager. It was an article geared towards young women. Teenage girls, they live in a wonderful world of their own. This article captured the socio-emotional state of white middle-class teenage girls. Beforehand, there had never been a time for teens to grow up, but with the invention of this term, there was now a time to grow up where there had not been one before. So why did this happen? What changed? The reason for this can be attributed to three interrelated factors which all lead back to the Industrial Revolution. The first reason is the rise of compulsory education. The Industrial Revolution sent families to the cities to find work, and considering there was no minimum age labor laws, they also sent their children to work. This triggered a counter movement to prevent child labor, and the solution was to send children to school and add years of compulsory education. From the 1920 to 1936, teenagers more than doubled from 30% to 60% and began to develop their own customs and their own social rules.
Dress, I think. I mean, for a while, white bucks were popular. Everybody who could get them got white bucks and saddle shoes. And now I guess, kids just try to imitate college boys.
The second reason is the post-war economic boom. Economic stability allowed for stable wages, and families began having less kids because of the legalization of the pill and the rise in female education. With less children being born, they began doubling on children enrichment, such as summer camps and tutoring. And the last reason is the invention of the car. This gave teenagers freedom that they had never seen to explore the world. Instead of working, they now had leisure time to spend with friends and with family. If they wanted to, probably not, but they had time on their hands now. So courtship and dating also changed, because whereas previously the first date would happen at home with your family, which was probably so awkward if you think about it, now teens had the liberty to go on dates because they had their own cars. The creation of the concept of teenagers is what gave birth to this weird obsession that the media and adults have with the livelihoods of teenagers. So let's get into 2000s teen films. Let's talk about the characteristics that made these movies the main archetypes and actually what eventually happened to these movies, because you can see now the type of movies that are being released that are geared towards teens. They're very politically oriented and they're very politically correct.
To the nine, so they know I'm number one.
Fat kids can be popular.
The preferred term is body positive.
What about the Asian kids?
And the genderqueer? Bang! Obviously, the gays and Jews are over.
But I feel like movies in the 2000s were, I would say, more direct, and they had, I don't want to say more substance, but they were more enjoyable than the movies that we watch today, because today you can tell that there is a political agenda behind most teen films that are released, and Hollywood is kind of putting out this type of narrative that they think teens want to see. But when we watch these super fun and nostalgic just teen comedies, there is no political agenda. It's really just teens and how Hollywood thinks teens are. So I rather watch 2000 teen films all day instead of watching movies that are geared towards teens but have a political agenda. And an example of a movie that actually kind of had a political agenda is the first Bring It On movie, in which they showcased cultural appropriation. So in that movie, that is like the perfect example of how you could tackle an issue about, like, a political issue about cultural appropriation or something that you are discontented with in society. So the main attributes of teen films from the 2000s were that they were mainly centered around the popular kids and an outcast. This outcast always had to undergo an extensive social cleansing and makeover to become a part of the popular crowd. She would have to forget her ways in order to integrate and assimilate to the popular crowd. I will talk further about this idea of the main character later on in this video, but this is a very toxic way to perceive the world. You wouldn't really notice how the story kind of unfolded, especially as being a young person, because of how attractive the people were. At least that's like all I remember, because like when I'm watching She's All That, like I'm not really focused on like the main character that's going through like a transformation. I'm here looking at all the boys and how hot the girls are. So the message of like loving yourself would never really translated to me as a child. But now that I'm older, I can see that in some of these films they do have that message. However, it's overlooked because of how hot the cast is. I was shallow when I was a child. So what happened to these films? We cannot dispute the sudden disappearance of these films. According to the Center for the Study of Women in Television and Film at San Diego University, the number of women screenwriters was at a high point in 2000 at 14% among the 250 films, but by 2006 that number dipped to 10%. Even if the number of women directors began to rise, the diversity of these women needs to be taken into consideration to ensure that different stories are being told. And besides the diminishing number of female directors as a contributing factor to the disappearance of these films, there's also one other source to blame, which is the rise of YA book adaptations. So let's talk about what made these movies such a big scam, or what makes them such a big scam when you watch them. Firstly, the age of the actors. The age of the actors is a big problem in teen comedies because oftentimes the cast of the films are a lot older and they do not look like teens at all. It's ridiculous. These films depict teens as being drop dead gorgeous with little to no acne, perfect hair, perfect bodies, perfect makeup, and they do not depict the realities of teenagers and how teenagers actually look. I had a lot of acne growing up in high school, which started in the 8th grade, and I honestly thought it was the end of the world when I first started having acne. It's so weird today because my skin's a lot better now, and I never even realized how bad my skin was until I started watching throwbacks on Snapchat of how my skin used to be. But teens in films start off how I ended in high school. And it's just super unrealistic. The messages perpetrated in these films shape the view of how teens feel that they need to act to ensure that these years are considered the best years of their lives. However, you have all your life to have a good time, and you don't need to force yourself to do things that you don't want to do to be considered cool or to be considered a valid teenager.
Okay. I'm gonna need to see some identification.
Really? Makes me feel young again.
Thirdly, the cliques. So there will always be cliques and groups of people that form. That's just the way of life. However, these films, they put way too much emphasis on cliques and this weird divergence between one clique and another.
Who's the stowaway? Oh my god, has she been there the whole time?
That's Claire.
Do we like her?
No.
The films foster more social exclusion than necessary because nerds are considered ugly and boring. If you're pretty, you cannot be smart, or you're smart to the point where you're considered kind of sociopathic.
Oh, hello. May I please speak to Taylor Waddell?
She's not home yet. Who's calling?
Oh, this is Susan from Planned Parenthood. I have her test results. If you could have her give me a call as soon as she can. It's urgent. Thank you. She's not going out with anyone.
These are all binaries, ways of viewing the world, and unrealistic because in reality, people are multifaceted human beings and shouldn't be placed in boxes. Lastly, let's quickly talk about the lack of diversity in these films. Do minorities not go to high school?
I am the token black guy. I'm just supposed to smile, stay out of the conversation, and say things like, damn, shit, and that is whack.
Often, these stories are told from the perspectives of white middle-class heterosexual characters, and their stories are simply not relatable to the majority of teens. So I've always found solace in the coming-of-age film, not primarily because of their relatability, but also because of the cinematography and the ambience of these films. Coming-of-age films have the tendency to make teen films a lot more realistic and enjoyable because of their plots and in some cases their relatability to the teenage experience. Some examples of my favorite coming-of-age films are As You Are, which was the first coming-of-age film that I ever saw, and it completely shifted the narrative of how I saw teenagers, because before then I usually watched teen comedies in which teens, it was just always super bright and happy, and there were always happy endings, but to life there is not always happy endings. Life is life. So teen comedies, they usually paint teenagers as always having super fun happy endings, but As You Are, it was a movie that did not have a happy ending, and it really changed my perspective of teen. Then there was Kings of Summer, which I loved a lot, followed by Girlhood and Yes God Yes. Although coming-of-age movies are a lot more relatable, they still display the stories of white middle-class characters, and they don't focus on the stories of minorities. Selah The Spades could have been a good coming-of-age film, however, it was honestly extremely confusing and it was hard to follow. The cinematography was good, but the plot, in my opinion, was not. There are coming-of-age stories for Black people, however, they're referred to as urban movies, such as Menace II Society, Boys in the Hood, Juice, and a more recent film which was All Day and the Night. These are coming-of-age stories because they fit into the criteria of what a coming-of-age story is. However, these are coming-of-age stories of Black men. But not everyone can relate to being Black and being in a gang, so these films are relatable, but not relatable to every Black person. So when there is representation for Black people, it's usually that they're in a gang or something like that. You're probably wondering why I would ever believe in movies like Bring It On and The Clique and Mean Girls, and why I would believe that these were accurate portrayals of high school. Well, if you're constantly being shown something on television and in the media about a certain group of people, at some point you're bound to believe it.